We are here today, and let me acknowledge Petras Ostrovicius. I'm really delighted to be partnering with you, Petras, on this, and thank you so much for bringing us together. Our purpose is not only to discuss these many challenges, but to also identify opportunities and ways in which Europe can contribute to protecting the achievements that have been made in Afghanistan, particularly by supporting civil society and democracy once NATO has left, the US and NATO have left. And I'm not going to give a long speech, but just in very briefly, there are a number of phenomenal achievements, whether relating to life expectancy, literacy, maternal and child mortality. There's a very vibrant and increasingly urbanized civil society, educated young people, including women and girls. There's been extraordinary economic progress, a thriving business sector, access to services, including electricity, drinking water, and sanitation. There's a progressive Islamic constitution that enshrines basic freedoms and human rights, democracy, elections, and a fairly lively parliament. And there are governmental institutions, some stronger than others, but delivering very important services. The challenges are equally enormous, and some of them are deep and tectonic, relating to things like climate change and environmental degradation, exacerbated by a rapidly growing population. And in the shorter term, we are facing, economic contraction, a deterioration of the security situation, and as I mentioned, a number of clouds on the horizon on the humanitarian front. Let me, before getting to the business in hand, I do need to make the point, and Petras, you may make it as well, that Europe and the European Union have a very strong track record in Afghanistan, not only over the last 20 years, but I would say stretching even further back, and played a critical role, not only as members, many countries as members of NATO, but over 4 billion euros in development assistance has been provided since 2002, representing 80% of the total ODA to Afghanistan, and 1.2 billion has been pledged for the 3 or 4 years before us. There has also been a long-term commitment expressed in many other ways, including through civil society. I've had the great privilege of working in Afghanistan since 1988 in various ways, and the solidarity of European actors with Afghans, sometimes expressed through NGOs, but in many other ways, it is as a permanent feature, and it has survived everything. It survived the collapse of the Najibullah regime, the civil war, the Taliban presence. So there is a deep commitment by Europe. So the question is, what can now be done to protect these gains, to protect civil society? And I hesitate in front of so many distinguished civil society representatives, but I would put it that by civil society, we don't just mean NGOs with websites, even though they are very, very important. We mean individuals and organizations and networks around the country that are independent of government and that represent the interests of people, in their various identities and capacities. So what can we do to protect these gains, to protect civil society going forward? I am going to introduce people properly prior to them making the remarks, but just in a nutshell to say that Petras Auštrevičius, who's chair of the delegation for relations with Afghanistan, will kick us off with some opening remarks. We will then have 2 keynote speeches of approximately 10 minutes each, one by Marietta Yeager, who's the Deputy Director General in the DG for International Partnerships, and then one by Dr. Abdullah, who, among many other things, is chair of the High Council for National Reconciliation. We will then have a brief opportunity for Petras to talk to Dr. Abdullah and Marietta, and then I will turn to our three distinguished civil society speakers, Ahmed Masood Amer, who's in London, Huma Saeed, who's in Kabul, and Fariha Isa, who's also in Kabul. And then we will have a question and answer session. I've been asked to make a few technical and guiding points. Number one, that this event is open to the general public. It is being live streamed as we speak on Facebook. The registration list includes people from Afghanistan as well as around Europe, and a number of members of the European Parliament, including journalists, think tanks, and NGOs. This is not taking place under the Chatham House rule, so be advised that what you say will be maybe quoted and held against you. So you should know that. And my intention as moderator, and it's always quite difficult in these digital formats, is to encourage a lively conversation and to see if we have time to do that. So for those of you who are participating, please put your questions in the Q&A box, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. And with the help of a couple of colleagues, I will try and do my best to make sure that as many of those are taken back to our distinguished speakers. So let me start with Petras Auštrevičius. He's a Lithuanian politician, diplomat, and member of the European Parliament, serving on the European Parliament's Committee of Foreign Affairs in his second term. He has many, many roles in the European Parliament. I won't list them all with his permission, but I do want to emphasize his role as chair of the European Parliament's Delegation for Relations with Afghanistan. But we have a very distinguished and knowledgeable member of the European Parliament. Petras, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much for our great partnership in organizing this event. And I do thank you, all your staff, which made available our today's online discussion. Dr. Abdullah, friends and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, in 2 months' time, we will face a new situation in Afghanistan. The withdrawal of US NATO troops by 11th of September will create a new security, development, and political situation in Afghanistan. Troops withdrawal will bring new uncertainties, less stability, and even the worst-case scenario, a takeover by the Taliban. By troops withdrawal, we can't pretend thinking of closing doors and leaving our Afghan partners alone, facing a new reality. It is a high time now to think about our joint strategy, how to preserve the achievements of the past 2 decades, particularly regarding human rights and fundamental freedoms against the background of the new security parameters on the ground and the providing so needed assistance. Considering the nexus of security and development, we have to stay engaged in both fields, security and development, and foremost, to encourage a political solution of the conflict and facilitate the Afghan peace process. By protecting our common achievements for Afghan society and development, the European Union financial support to future Afghanistan should be based on conditionality, as countries' government continues to subscribe to the basic principles of democracy, human rights, rule of law, good governance, and fight against corruption. Ladies and gentlemen, by European Parliament resolution from June this year, in which we expressed our readiness to remain a trusted partner of Afghan people we are looking forward for our joint agenda, which we have to produce right now and implement in a changing environment very soon. Let me thank once again the European Institute of Peace for cooperation and leading this discussion, and I'm looking forward for our continuous cooperation in years to come. Thank you so much.
Let me now turn to Marietta Yeager. She is the Deputy Director General for the Directorate General of International Partnerships. She's been working in the Commission for over 15 years, both on the energy and transport side, and then as head of cabinet to the Transport Commissioner. And she has a long and distinguished career in the Slovenian government and Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So Marietta, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Michael. Excellencies, Chairman of the High Council for National Reconciliation, Dr. Abdullah, Honorable Member of European Parliament, dear Petras, and of course, Michael Keating. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning to all of you. It's an honor for me to represent Commissioner Urpilainen in this very important event today. The EU is fully committed to supporting the people of Afghanistan in this complex and bleak period. I would like, first of all, to start by expressing our solidarity with the victims of the ongoing violence and their families. And the EU has constantly called for a ceasefire and will continue to do so by, of course, acknowledging that the security situation is worsening by days. We are closely watching the situation, especially in the view of the withdrawals, as previous speakers have said. So at this time of uncertainty and instability, let me reaffirm the EU's unwavering commitment to Afghanistan and its people. The EU is a long-standing partner of Afghanistan, and together with the member states, the EU is Afghanistan's larger development partner, as said by Michael before as well. So most notably, we've been working together with to promote democracy, human rights, women's rights, and rights of minorities, of course, the rule of law and fight against corruption, inclusive economic development and equal access to basic services, and the regional cooperation and connectivity into Central Asia. So the country has changed considerably in last 20 years, and let me not repeat all the achievements, but just to say that the life expectancy has increased by a decade. Maternal and infant mortality have significantly decreased, and while a lot to be done for gender equality, women have made tremendous inroads, with 50% of community development councils and 27% of members of the public service being composed of women. We are proud to have contributed to this achievement. But of course, the political and economic situation is difficult, and the COVID-19 crisis has worsened the situation. And last year, we immediately mobilized resources to address the health and social economic impact of pandemic. And we also know that the health crisis is far from over, with the intense third wave of the COVID-19 infections. But the situation is made worse by a severe spring drought and conflict and hunger, with up to 12 million people being actually food insecure, are expected to lead to further displacement of the population. Through the quick mobilization of humanitarian aid, we are also responding to the current drought and food crisis. But all that is difficult to sustain in the context of the large-scale violence. And we have been following with the concern the intensification of the fighting and increasing military gains made by Taliban. And the EU and member states have actively advocated for a negotiated settlement in every possible forum. And I'm using this opportunity today as well. And we have been conducting also intense diplomatic outreach with the parties in the conflict and also Afghanistan's neighbors and other relevant actors. So the EU has always been clear in its engagement to support an inclusive peace process that really preserves and furthers the human rights and fundamental freedoms of all Afghans, but specifically and explicitly the women, children, and persons belonging to minorities and the group of risk. Commissioner Urpilainen told me again to make this point very clear and vocal, and she also did it in 2020 Geneva conference. So EU assistance will be maintained or adjusted depending on Afghanistan's continued commitment to democracy, human rights, gender equality, and transparent and accountable governance. With those key principles in mind, we also engaged very actively in the discussion of the Afghanistan Partnership Framework. And we made it clear to both sides of the conflict that our support is really a subject to those democratic values, and that we are ready to adjust our cooperation should any further government in Kabul no longer share the same principles. So this conditionality is being clearly reflected also in our upcoming programming, and we are currently conducting the programming for the period 21-27. And the European Union's engagement in Afghanistan for this period 21-27 will be really based on the second Afghan National Peace and Development Framework for the period 21-25, along with the sector-specific national priority programs that operationalize it. So we are really working towards a new MEP that should cover the following 3 priority areas, and let me share them with you. So we would like to do enabling peace with a focus on reconciliation, reintegration, security, and rule of law, strengthening the state, building on previous work on the institution building and public service, and of course, sustainable, inclusive economic growth with a focus on trade and regional cooperation and employment. So as you can see, we are giving more importance to peace and conciliation and also a long-term development. But as I mentioned, things are changing quickly and the situation is complex. However, abandoning our goals of peace, stability, and self-reliance in face of the challenges could contribute to the scenario that we most want to avoid. So today's topic, how to preserve the achievements in Afghanistan, is very timely. And I can only say that EU will continue supporting the civil society and freedom of media in Afghanistan. We consider it essential to support non-governmental organizations in the provision of basic services to the population under circumstances where the official service provision is insufficient or absent. But building on its long track record, the EU will also continue supporting the capacity building of non-governmental organizations and other civil society actors, in particular of those working to improve the respect for women's and minorities' rights and to better implement and monitor the projects, as well as improving their capacity to conduct relevant policy dialogue with the government. We are also focusing now in exchanging our response and enhancing our support to the human rights defenders, supporting a safer environment for them to operate. And increasing threats and attacks against the Hazara minority are also requiring our full attention, and we do put all the attention to that. Let me say, in concluding my speech, a couple of words on gender equality, that it's priority for all of us. And it's also fundamental for both internal and external action. So you know that in November 2020, we adopted the Gender Action Plan 3, building on previous plans, but this one with a more ambitious agenda in fight against gender-based violence and participation of women in public and economic life. and we are going to monitor that. An important aspect of the new plan is the measurement of our impact, and this we will pay special attention. While we are sending a clear message of support, we know that the situation can evolve in the wrong direction. So we are in close contact with the member states and other partners on the ground who are also discussing possible scenarios. A further deterioration of the situation will lead us to work in ways that preserve our support to people on essential services such as health, food production, food security, and the community level activities. Let me conclude by saying that whatever happens in the short term, we still believe that in keeping a long-term vision of a peaceful, democratic, and prosperous Afghanistan is our priority. The country has changed profoundly in the last 20 years, and the panelists here today have made a very important contribution to this transformation. It's our common goal and objective to preserve it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marietta. Very, very interesting remarks, and it's good to hear such a strong commitment by the European Union. Of course, as you've also mentioned, there are a number of scenarios that could unfold, and that will pose many challenges in terms of being able to continue supporting people. I can't help saying that I was around in Afghanistan between 96 and 99 when the Taliban controlled much of the country. And this posed huge challenges for development actors. On the one hand, wanting to continue supporting people, on the other hand, fighting the Taliban to be deeply unacceptable as partners in terms of their values and capacity. And I hope we don't get back to that situation, but there could be many dilemmas before us. It is now my privilege and honor to introduce Dr. Abdullah. He doesn't actually need much of an introduction to the kind of people on this call, but I can't resist just saying, introducing him. He's both a medical doctor and a freedom fighter, I think, as well as a very distinguished diplomat and politician. He has been involved in the Afghan people's struggle for freedom for more decades than he would probably care to admit, and was very close to the late Ahmed Shah Massoud, the legendary hero of Afghanistan. Among his many accomplishments have been as Deputy Foreign Minister with the Islamic State, and then Foreign Minister with the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan after Bonn, as well as leader of the opposition, presidential candidate several times, chief executive of the Islamic Republic, and now chairman of the High Council for National Reconciliation. He is well known for his progressive views, his advocacy for Afghanistan, and he, in his most recent capacity, he's right at the center of efforts to coalesce the Republic around efforts to achieve a political settlement, supporting the negotiation team, as well as in the thick of it in Kabul. So without further ado, Dr. Seb, thank you so much again for agreeing to speak to us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Distinguished colleagues, Honorable Petras Auštrevičius, Madam Marietta Yeager, panelists, my country, women of civil society, representatives of civil society, all of you, good morning to those of you who are outside, and good afternoon to those who are in Kabul. I want to thank EU Institute of Peace and also European Parliament for providing this opportunity for us to, at this critical moment for the people of Afghanistan, and also when it comes to the joint sacrifices that we have made all together, the gains that we have been made, the achievements which Michael will refer to, and also two other distinguished speakers spoke about. At this critical juncture, still, in spite of the rise in the violence, difficulties of the security situation, increased military activities of the Taliban, the gains that they have made, back and forth of the military security situation, I still believe that the best goal for Afghanistan, the best aim, something that Afghans can aim for it will be peace. And my job as the chair of the High Council for National Reconciliation, which is to bring consensus, to generate consensus and strengthen that in support of the peaceful efforts, not just within Afghanistan, but also in collaboration with our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and other institutions in the region and beyond. It is faced, that those efforts are faced with a big dilemma or big challenge, as it was mentioned earlier as well, mainly due to the activities of the Taliban, and also wasting time around the negotiating table, not taking advantage of the opportunity which is there still to capitalize on knowing one another and find ways of living with one another peacefully without resorting to violence or terrorist actions. I'll get to in some details about the current situation, but meanwhile, I want to thank EU for all its contributions. The largest donor, the biggest troop contributor, and perhaps even more important is the values that in principles that you have supported, which are democratic values, human rights, women's rights, gender equality, rule of law, inclusive growth, and all of that, the right of victims, the right of children, children's rights, the right of minorities, and freedom of speech. All of those are critical gains. And as a citizen of this country, and also in my position as chair of the council, I want to express my gratitude to all of you, EU institutions, members of parliament, and citizens of your countries, which have helped us in the past. And meanwhile, because of the continued commitment expressed earlier by two distinguished speakers in support of the people of Afghanistan. That is from my heart, that we are grateful for all your contributions. And your recent EU resolution in support of inclusive, peaceful settlement and condemnation of violence and targeted killing and all of that. That's also very much welcomed in your contributions for the years ahead. And the areas that you have focused is the areas which the people of Afghanistan, which are the priorities of the people of Afghanistan, including the humanitarian situation because of the intensification of the conflict, internally displaced people, returnees of the past, those who are being displaced because of the drought, all of this. And also recently, as it was mentioned earlier, COVID in the tool that it has taken from our people. And this time around, it is much more serious, much more problematic than it was in the past. But I want to thank you for all of this. So with the start of negotiations in Doha, prior to that, we had the Doha Agreement between the United States and the Taliban. Okay, the Doha Agreement is what it is, but it provided an opportunity for us to get together. There was a concern with me as a chair of the council, but as a citizen of this country, do Taliban really mean peace, making peace with the people of Afghanistan, or just they want to show us as if they are serious, but without getting serious into negotiations, and also build up their own military capacity, and then with the hope that when the troops withdraw from Afghanistan, then they will return back by force. That was my concern, and unfortunately, signs are not that optimistic in terms of Taliban intentions. That does not mean that we should stop negotiations. Our negotiating team is still in Doha. The contact group, the negotiators will start negotiations from in 1 or 2 days onward. There were other opportunities which you might have heard about it. There was supposed to be a conference in Turkey, which has not happened, again due to very strict conditions which Taliban attached to that opportunity. But still, we have not given up. There is an enhanced role for the United Nations in the peace talks, and EU member states, and also EU also has been actively supporting through different ways and means the efforts towards peaceful settlement, which with an end state, which is inclusive, democratic, pluralistic, stable, and at peace, of course, within and without. So the recent military security situation has created added challenges to what already was there to the population. As it was mentioned, or as we see it, Taliban had some gains. In some areas, there has been back and forth. Altogether, what could be done? Like, rather than getting into the details of the current situation, but our EU partners can do, I think your support and your continued commitment, the message that you give, which is part of the resolution as well, and also that's a clear message that if any entity want to have to be seen and considered as part of a system or in the system as a reliable partner, they cannot go on by increasing the level of violence, by inflicting casualties and suffering on its own people, and then hope that one day they will be able to win militarily. That intention, it's wrong. It's a miscalculation. It will not happen. I've been through this in the past 40 years in different phases of my life. One thing, if there is one lesson, that is that there is no military solution in one side. All sides cannot impose its will through military means. That is the lesson of our recent history, the past 43 years. And I hope that they realize, the Taliban, and those who have countries which have leverages will use their leverages, and also EU through its own ways and means, through different institutions, government to government relations, and through EU itself, and parliament to parliament, and civil society to civil society, can give that message and can strengthen that message further and communicate it further that a military solution is not acceptable. As a citizen of this country, I know there will be ups and downs, there will be back and forth, but Taliban cannot win militarily. Still, there is an opportunity, and yesterday we had the meeting of High Council for National Reconciliation. The majority or all of those there, while they were very upset with the military security situation and very concerned, they were still of the opinion that the efforts in support of peace should continue. But I want to thank you, and I will suffice here. Petras spoke less than 10 minutes, so I thought that I have a few minutes more than 10 minutes, and I used it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdullah. Very moving and to the point, your remarks. In a minute, I am going to turn to our civil society representatives, but before doing that, I would like to know, encourage if there are any points that Petras you would like to make, or Marietta, particularly to Dr. Abdullah, or in reaction to anything that has been said so far.
Thank you, Michael. I will definitely use this opportunity to thank Dr. Abdullah as well as Marietta Yeager for their statements and very strong commitment from both sides. To engage into the cooperation which is based on clear principles and conditionality. But I have probably two short questions, kind of clarifying questions, to both of the speakers, with your permission. Mr. Abdullah, well, we observed recent increase of Taliban activities in the east as well as north, with some provisional gains and then retreat. Those military activities show that Taliban didn't give up its military strategy, to prevail militarily over some regions. But at the same time, as you are engaged in reconciliation and very important talks domestically in Afghanistan, to what extent, you see that Taliban is ready to reciprocate, for example, to the release of Taliban prisoners with some more positive and constructive engagement? Is that just a wish from our side and from a kind of hope from the government of Afghanistan, or is it real? Is there any kind of major shift which we might observe in probably future reconciliation process? Mr. Abdullah.
Thank you. I mentioned about Doha Agreement. There were some commitments which Taliban had made there, including reduction in violence, participating in good faith in the negotiations, and de-linking with Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups. In exchange for the international troops withdrawal, delisting, and exchange of prisoners or prisoners released. So as a goodwill gesture, and also in order to give the efforts a new energy, and that was the demand from our international partners as well, we expedited the prisoners exchange program. As a result, 5,000 prisoners, Taliban prisoners, were released. And that had the approval of our Loya Jirga, but there were a lot of concerns as well attached to that, because percentage of those people returned back to the battlefield. That in itself was very problematic, a significant percentage. So we have thought that will open the way for meaningful negotiations, and unfortunately, signs are not positive, as I mentioned earlier as well. Perhaps they think that there is military resorting to military activities is a solution. There have been targeted assassinations of members of the civil society, as it was referred to earlier. Hazara communities in Kabul, especially, they were targeted in massive numbers. We had casualties amongst them and in different level of violence. And recently, with the announcement of the start of the troop withdrawal, these recent activities. So I'm not giving up hopes, but to talk to the people that we're supporting the peace process while the majority of the people are supportive of the peace process. And the reality that they are faced with is violence, is displacement, is humanitarian situation as a result of the conflict in all aspects of the conflict. So that's getting more and more difficult. I've not lost all hopes, but for example, talking about prisoners' release. If we are talking about a package of prisoner release plus ceasefire, long-term ceasefire, why not? Let's start and discuss it. Then our negotiating team is authorized to enter into discussions about all issues. But unfortunately, around the negotiating table, Taliban are putting their demands in a very vague manner. They're talking about Islamic system, they're talking about sometimes even about human rights and women's rights, but when you get to details, it's anything but human rights and women's rights. So that's all I can say.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. Thank you for your explanation and very strong message on possible solutions, and of course, reconciliation as such. It's a way forward to the lasting peace in Afghanistan. My second question, Michael, would be to Marietta Yeager, who made a very strong statement about the unwavering commitment. For supporting Afghanistan even after the troops withdrawal. My question, Marietta, would be. To what extent, I know that the programming for the next period, budgetary period, has started under the new instrument as Global Europe. Very essential, very big and powerful financial instrument, which is in itself has very many additional instruments. Marietta, would you be willing to bring something more? What kind of the major priorities we might see for the next programming period what comes to the assistance to Afghanistan, since we have even European Peace Facility as absolutely new instrument, as well as remaining development and other humanitarian instruments as well. What can we see something new for the next period what comes to Afghanistan? Marietta.
Thank you very much for your question, and thank you to Dr. Abdullah for his strong I would say support of EU support and contribution. I can say that EU development support for Afghanistan has until now strong focus, of course, as I said before, on the peace, state building, as well as the regional cooperation. So before we focused really on peace and stability, sustainable growth, and provision on basic services to citizens. And together, for the period 2014-2020, we have contributed around 1.4 billion, more or less 200 per year. Now we are really in the programming phase, so we are still discussing, first of all, with our Afghan partners, but also we are involved in a very deep dialogue with the European Parliament on the priorities. And I said that our new MEP for 21-27 will really focus again on enabling peace with the focus on reconciliation, reintegration, and the security and rule of law. Of course, here the peace facility will also be part of the discussion, and then strengthening of the state and the building on the previous results that I have just mentioned. And of course, nothing will work without the very inclusive economic growth. So basically build back or forward, better, greener, digital and fair society. So we are really starting our inter-service consultation now in July, and we will have a second discussion with the European Parliament after a very successful one a couple of weeks ago, I think in October. And then we will finalize the multi-annual indicative program, of course, in close cooperation with the European Parliament, where you will have a say, and of course with our Afghan partners. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Marietta. Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. Michael, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I would just like to say how dispiriting it was, Dr. Seb, to hear, you saying that the commitment of the Taliban to achieving their objectives through talks seems to be uncertain, and that their behavior does not indicate that they are as serious as they need to be. I also just want to acknowledge the work that you and your team have done to prepare for these talks, the support that's been provided to the negotiation team from Kabul. I think it's an extraordinarily well-prepared team, but it takes two to tango. And, one side being serious is just not enough. But I think the point you are making is that even if things are in the doldrums now, one needs to remain ready. And that, of course, does beg the question as to what are the carrots and sticks that can be deployed to encourage the Taliban, to be more serious about achieving their objectives through a political process rather than militarily. And I imagine this raises issues about what's going on inside the movement, as well as the role of some of the regional actors. So these are very big questions. I hope that everyone can stay to the end of this, because I think some of these may come back to us. But now I would like, with everyone's permission, to turn to our three speakers from Afghan civil society. They have each offered to speak to up to 5 minutes, which would be great, because that would leave us a good 20 minutes for question and answers, and they're coming in. I'm going to start with Ahmad Masood Amer, and I want to acknowledge your role in triggering this meeting. Ahmad is the Executive Director of the Center for Afghan Policy Studies and has a long career in the development field, including, but not just through UNDP, where he led the Democratic Governance Program, and also the task force that resulted in the establishment of the Afghan Parliament, the Citizen Participation Program aspect of that. He's recently organized the Afghan Diaspora's virtual international conference that was inaugurated by President Ghani and SRSG Alliance. The floor is yours, Ahmed. What can we do to protect civil society in these very difficult times?
Thank you very much, Michael. His Excellency Dr. Abdullah, Chairman of the High Peace Council, Mr. Petras Auštrevičius, Madam Marietta Yeager, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to begin by expressing our deep gratitude for the European Institute of Peace for organizing this opportunity for us to speak to you. And I would like to begin by reiterating our appreciation to the European Union for their continued support to the people of Afghanistan. As Excellency Dr. Abdullah alluded, the Afghan people share important values and principles with the EU. So we are thankful for all the support over the last 20 years. As we know, 9/11 attack on the US brought the brevity of the threat posed by the international terrorism organizations using Afghanistan as a safe havens into light. It further highlighted that if the crisis in Afghanistan is left unresolved, it can threaten global peace and order. So I would like to take this moment today to remind ourselves that the same reality exists today as the US and NATO are preparing to leave Afghanistan. The Afghan nation joined this mission to free their country, and in this partnership, we have paid huge losses of lives and material. So while we welcome the departure, the military departure, and we look at it as an opportunity, but we hope that this opportunity can also accelerate the process of building and strengthening domestic institutions. And as such, the Afghan National Armed Forces, which has played an unparalleled role in the battlefield. The Afghan peace talks, which began after the signing of the agreement by the US with the Taliban, unfortunately is facing unknown impasses. As the peace talks is underway, the Afghan people continue to suffer from unprecedented level of violence. We are standing against an emboldened enemy, unfortunately, which is using violence to silence or oppress the Afghan people. They are assassinating schoolgirls, women leaders, journalists, judges, doctors, and the list goes on. But this does not convey the full and crippling impact of the violence. For every Afghan killed, there are many more who leave their professions or sadly feel that their country is no more safe for them and they have to leave. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to also highlight the issues of aid management and governance of the country. Over the last 20 years, I think we have seen billions of dollars poured into Afghanistan. But today, I think the country is still hugely dependent on international aid. So we have to look at it, how aid has been utilized and how it has been governed. So we need to look at the issue of accountability and governance in that context. We believe that over the last 20 years, our government has had more an outward accountability towards the aid providers. But to move forward, I think there has to be a more rigorous relationship between the Afghan government and the Afghan domestic institutions. And as such, I think we need to look at it, how to strengthen a system of checks and balance, a system where power is shared and controlled. So all people of Afghanistan can benefit from aid in the future as we move forward. We are also aware of the donor fatigue. We are aware that donors, while they are facing pressure back home, they have continued to express support to Afghanistan. And in this regard, I think it's important to learn from the lessons of the last 20 years. And in that regard, I think the role of, and also the relationship between different institutions of governance need to be relooked. So in order to ensure a sustainable and enduring results are achieved. And for the peace process to move forward, I think reduction in violence is not an acceptable term. I think violence needs to stop to make peace work. So we have seen that while negotiations are underway, civilians are getting butchered. We see on daily basis our people getting killed. So we hope that at some point we come to terms to end violence. So using different measures, country-to-country relationship, those who are supporting fighting in Afghanistan, supporting their groups and taking leverage of using terror to advance their goals in Afghanistan, they should come to terms. They should be put under pressure to stop that and engage in a meaningful discussions to find a mediated and agreed solution so the peace can come to Afghanistan. Lastly, I think for all these atrocities, horrific atrocities of killing of civilians, we urge the EU and the international community to support fielding of fact-finding missions to independently investigate that who are behind these targeted killings of the civilian innocent people in Afghanistan and bring them to justice. And we hope at some point our neighbors, our partners can realize that there are a lot of positive potentials in Afghanistan that can be utilized to turn Afghanistan into, as it used to be, the Garden of Asia, the connecting route of Central and South Asia, and a center of peace and development. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ahmad. And you've raised an extraordinarily important point, which is the accountability to ordinary citizens, and whether that has actually been secondary, unfortunately, to accountability to people providing the money from outside the country. And I would argue that actually accountability to people is the best way of ensuring accountability to international donors as well. And I think you're saying has not been as good as it needs to be, but there is actually an opportunity now to focus and strengthen this. And I wonder if this is something that the European Union also believes. You've made a number of other points, but let me now go to Marietta Yeager, who is a lawyer, a human rights defender, and researcher in the field of women and human rights, and one, we have met before, I think, I can't remember where, but I recognize you. But I have to say, I am always deeply impressed by the strength and courage of women such as yourself, who are standing up and willing to advocate and fight for the rights and for delivery of services to people. And I know it's particularly challenging right now as a woman doing that. You are a target. So let me acknowledge your bravery and that of others in similar situations. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Michael. Thank you, Excellency Dr. Abdullah, and thank you, Madam Marietta. Thank you very much for providing this great opportunity. It is indeed a great initiative and a very difficult timing. And to me, it's really an honor to speak among the esteemed guests and distinguished panelists and participants of the session. First of all, let me begin by expressing my appreciation and heartfelt gratitude to the EU for their continued support to the people of Afghanistan. We are appreciating that, and thank you for it. We all know by now that the security situation, unfortunately, in Afghanistan is weakening dramatically. Taliban are filling the vacuum that the American troops are leaving behind. And we hear that the government could collapse within 6 months of the American withdrawal from Afghanistan. As September 11, the deadline for the departure of American troops come closer, the Taliban are becoming increasingly encouraged. Taliban have captured the country's border to Tajikistan. Within 2 months, more than 80 districts have fallen to the hands of Taliban. And that's due to the micromanagement, mismanagement, and lack of equipment and support. And of course, appointment based on quotas, not merit. Today, our Afghan forces demoralized with the corruption in our government. And I can say that for sure that the corruption is one of the biggest challenges for the Afghanistan security forces, which of course fuels the Taliban. The US and the NATO have committed to pay billions and billions of dollars to finance Afghanistan security forces, but yet the Afghan army of today is half-equipped, untrained, and compared to the army left behind by former Soviet Union, as experts say. But despite the corruption and the lack of attention from the government, the Afghan army, not only the Afghan army, remained on the front line of the fight against terrorism, the international and regional terrorism, but the people of Afghanistan as well, including women and men. As I'm speaking now, thousands and thousands of women are standing, to raise their voices in support of the security forces and to defeat the country. and trying to defeat and secure the country. And it gives a clear message to all of us that the people of Afghanistan want peace, and they deserve a meaningful peace. But if the Taliban doesn't want peace, that they do not, then the people of Afghanistan will stand to secure their country and fight against them. And I will be one of them among many others who stand to defeat the country, even if you're alone, left alone. As a result of the increased violence, as other distinguished panelists said, the number of displaced and migrated people increased dramatically, which is a big challenge to all of us, which is a brain drain to us, and then a very challenging thing to European countries as the issue of migration raises. The IDPs who are living in many difficulties accessing clean water, healthcare services, and many other challenges, and their challenges become worse and worse with the COVID-19 pandemic, as our speakers also said that. Moreover, in most of the provinces with high security threat, most of the NGOs, I mean, all of the NGOs, I can say, organizations who provide humanitarian aid, and very sadly, women's shelters, schools, and clinics are closing as the day passes. And that's all because of the increased security and threats in the provinces. Not only that, violence against civilians, military forces, human rights defenders, social activists, NGOs, even the government officials have increased dramatically across Afghanistan. However, almost 1.5 years have passed from the agreement signed between the United States and the Taliban, which is a complete failure and the huge big mistake from our perspective. The agreement, which with no presence of people of Afghanistan, not only legitimized Taliban internationally, it did not provide protection to the human rights, women and children, and it did not raise up at least the introduction of violence. And I think this is a big lesson learned for all of us to take into consideration. Ethnic and religious minorities, as many of the panelists mentioned that.
I don't know about others, but unfortunately, Fariha, you're frozen. Can anyone else hear her? No. Fariha, what we're going to do then is turn to Huma Saeed and then come back to you for your concluding minute, if you still have one. Huma, it seems you are also in Kabul, but your connection is clearly stronger. Huma is an affiliated senior researcher at the Leuven Institute of Criminology, down the road from where I am, although she's in Kabul now. And her research and policy expertise are in the areas of human rights, women's rights, housing, land and property rights, and transitional justice. She too has also worked with the UN, with UNDP, as well as with a number of human rights and women's rights organizations. So, Huma, thank you so much for joining us. You have the floor for 5 minutes, and then we will have a conversation. I may go back to Dr. Abdullah with some of the points that have been made, but invite questions and answers from the floor. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Good day to everyone. His Excellency Dr. Abdullah, distinguished members of EU Parliament, honorable panelists, and other participants. I would also like to start by thanking the European Institute of Peace and the European Parliament for organizing this very important and timely discussion. And I would also like to thank the European Parliament for its continuous support to Afghanistan, in particular to its civil society. As a researcher of post-conflict justice with focus on victim-centered justice in Afghanistan, I would like to address European Union. I would like to address EU support to civil society organizations towards this important cause. A 2005 report by the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission showed that almost 70% of Afghans identified themselves as direct or indirect war victims. An estimated 241,000 people have died as a result of the war on terror in the last 2 decades. Over the last several years, US and NATO supported Afghan government-led military operations have become the leading cause of civilian casualties in the conflict. 4 million Afghans have been displaced from their homes. 2/3 of the country are experiencing mental health problems. And countless more have suffered all the typical forms of fallout of war: malnutrition, lack of access to clean water, poverty, the list goes on. These and many more are the victims of war in Afghanistan. And after decades of conflict, they're finally mobilizing for their right to a seat at the table in discussions on the future of Afghanistan. Victim-centered justice is based on the idea that victims of gross violations of human rights and war victims have a fundamental right to mobilize for justice and accountability for past harms. Until recently, there was very little mobilization by or on behalf of these victims. This changed last year with the formation of the National Victims Network on December 10th, which demands a focus on victims' direct participation and testimony in the peace process, acknowledgement of their suffering, truth-seeking processes, reparations, and accountability measures. The 2015 EU policy framework on support to transitional justice puts a strong emphasis on the need for locally owned processes which are victim-centered, inclusive, and gender-sensitive. More specifically, in Afghanistan, the European Union has played an important role in supporting civil society organizations who have been engaged in promoting victim-centered justice. The National Victims Network mentioned earlier was established thanks to the support by the EU Afghanistan Peace Support Mechanism. Furthermore, recently, the EU Facility on Justice and Conflict and Transition produced a report that recommended a number of activities to pursue victim-centered justice. They include building transitional justice expertise of those participating in the peace process, facilitating victims' representation in the peace talks, strengthening EU messaging on transitional justice, and enhancing the efforts to document violations of human rights and international humanitarian law, particularly those committed since 2001. Similarly, the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission has also outlined a victim-centered justice framework that includes the need for official participation of a certain number of war victims in the negotiations, a mechanism whereby the parties to the negotiations can receive victims' testimony regarding their experiences, the establishment of individual and collective reparations programs for war victims, focus on community-based reconciliation efforts, and truth-seeking and documentation. These are important developments in the past couple of years towards the creation of a common voice and even platform on the complex issue of addressing victims' rights in peace talks. However, in the protracted and complex Afghan war of 43 years, where war victims constitute the biggest constituency, victims' rights is of general significance for the society at large that goes well beyond the peace process. Significantly, there has to be a recognition that Afghan women and children have paid a very high price in this war, and therefore gender justice must constitute a cornerstone of a victim-centered justice. A similar approach has shown success in other countries like Colombia, where bottom-up participation of civil society organizations and victims played a critical role in engaging victims in peace negotiations and helped to ensure that their demands were included in the peace process. It is a welcome step that the EU Afghanistan Peace Support Mechanism was renewed in December 2020 towards an inclusive peace process that comprises women, minorities, and civil society. It is heartening that the EU is interested in supporting a peace process that includes justice and addressing victims' rights. Therefore, the continuation of its support towards initiatives such as National Victims Network is much needed to ensure that gains on this path are not lost and that Afghan civil society organizations, including those of war victims, can continue their advocacy, mobilization, and importantly, meaningful participation in political discussions and decisions at this critical juncture. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Huma. Indeed, victims' engagement in peace processes can be extraordinarily powerful. I think, one of the challenges we face, as Dr. Abdullah has alluded to, is if there isn't, if the Taliban are not serious about engaging in talks, the question is how much can be invested by civil society in those talks. But I think what Ahmed and both you, Ahmed and Fariha, are saying is that we shouldn't be just talks centric. This is about bringing the needs of civil society and the needs of victims to the attention of the powerful, whether around the country or in Kabul or indeed with the Taliban. And that would actually be one of my questions is, to what degree are the Taliban, sensitive or motivated to respond to the needs of civil society? I suspect they have not been as sensitive and responsive as they should be. And I don't think they are going to last for very long in the areas they control if they are not. So maybe there is an opportunity there. I would like to come back to, in fact, any of you that I can see on this screen, the three civil society speakers, Petras and Dr. Abdullah. If any of you would like to speak, I certainly would like Dr. Abdullah to react to some of the things that he's heard and he's said. There have been a couple of questions, and I won't read them out word for word, but essentially the gist of them seems to be that we need to be prepared for a number of scenarios. And there's a dilemma here, because if you talk about the government collapsing and, a kind of, 1992 moment and so on, or even a Saigon moment, this is very debilitating and very demoralizing and not at all helpful. On the other hand, it is important to be prepared for scenarios. What I'm hearing in this conversation is that under any scenario, support for Afghan civil society, broadly defined, is going to be very, very important. Whatever happens, I'm also hearing that, advancing a negotiated solution does require the Taliban to be more serious about talks. I hesitate to say this in front of Dr. Abdullah because he knows far more about this than I do, but one can't help getting the impression that they're sort of, going along with talks just to keep everybody happy, but in the meantime are trying to achieve their goals, militarily. And that does beg the question as to what are the carrots and sticks that can be deployed, to get them to be more serious. Especially as if they, as you have alluded to, if they take power through force, they're going to inherit huge problems. I mean, both in terms of security in the country, in terms of responding to the needs of the population. And one does wonder the degree to which they have thought this through and whether, some of the conversations we're having in this call shouldn't be also with them. But could, other than picking on Petras and Dr. Abdullah, if anyone else would like to respond, any of our civil society participants would like to respond, just put your hand up or send me a message or do something. But in the meantime, Petras, would you like to react to some of this, or should I turn to Dr. Abdullah first? Maybe you could go first.
Thank you, Michael. I think it's extremely important, to give a sign and message of certainty to our civil society activists, those who are on the ground working and providing such important activities in many areas. NGOs and individual activists. They will be continuously supported from the European Union's programs, whatever it takes. you, Michael, absolutely right. I mean, it doesn't matter what scenario might prevail, and there might be more than one. Let's be frank. So this certainty should be translated to some new channels of our assistance and cooperation, because the situation might change from complicated to very complicated, and so those NGOs can't, be left in a kind of dark uncertainty and with no support. So that's why let's agree. I mean, the principle of support under any scenario is of the vital importance. Secondly, let's be frank, Taliban's advance or participation in any form of governance will be really conditioned to the achievements we so like to see in Afghanistan for years and decades and more longer to come. So that's why Taliban can't be only one deciding part in any circumstances. So that's why I see a very strong consensus behind this conditionality principle, and I believe Dr. Abdullah supports this principle as well as we hear kind of consensus from Afghan NGOs and activists as well. So that's why I think it's probably too early, I mean, to describe very exact decisions and support programs, but let's be very strong on principles under which the support will be programmed and provided. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Sepp, would you be willing to comment on anything that you feel is particularly relevant from what you heard? I mean, I heard you saying that EU should use its leverage, government to government, parliament to parliament, civil society to civil society. And of course, we have a particular group of people on this call, but I am impressed by the argument that actually much stronger support to civil society could be beneficial for everything, including even indirectly peace talks and security and so on. Do you buy that argument?
I agree. I agree, of course, but it has to be prioritized it should be done in a more focused manner. But supporting civil society, those are helping the situation and raising the voices of the people and doing things which are important for parts of the population which otherwise they will be like forgotten or they will not surface. Governments will have several priorities and responsibilities, but at times when the challenges are overwhelming, very important priorities will be missed from the agendas of the governments. And on mainly two topics, which earlier Madame Fariha Isar and also Madame Mama Saeed mentioned, and also Ahmed Masood Mir, our colleague, mentioned, it's important. Accountability to the people, transparency, dealing with the issue of corruption and at all levels at any time, and also paying attention to the fate of victims and also justice. There again, when it comes to for example, to the negotiations, being in Doha, the two negotiating teams, Taliban didn't agree on the participation of on victim groups. Going there and talking to both negotiating teams. While here, we of course we have provided a different platforms under the High Council for National Reconciliation or through different interactions to create those opportunities. So that's one. Then on the what could be done and the messages, a sort of coherent message all the time with consistency on the basis of principles which all of us in this group agree, and millions of other people in our country, and also that's the foundation of values for US, EU. To be consistent on that, that's important. Whether it matters for the Taliban, if the people suffer because of the lack of support, because sometimes we are. It's important. It's important to continue to make those efforts, but there might be mentalities that okay, we took over, and then later on people will be faced with a sort of fait accompli, and then they will have no choice. Or some people may even think that okay, what if? Then we will do other things in order to make personal. Are they really interested in the fate of the people? So these negotiations was an opportunity for them to show more sense of responsibility towards the people of Afghanistan, which have suffered so much in the past 43 years, and also a big, huge opportunity which is ahead of us. I was in Washington a few days back, and the messages were more or less the same as the messages that I heard today about the fate of women, human rights, rule of law, and all of that. So the opportunity for a post-peace Afghanistan is huge. All the countries of the region, they're looking towards Afghanistan for benefiting from connectivity. And of course, instability in Afghanistan will be a big impediment for economic growth in the region as well. So how much opportunities we have missed already, and how much more we will miss, and what are the potentials for everybody benefiting from a peaceful situation in Afghanistan. So consistency in coherence and giving the messages all the time and using different channels will help.
Thank you so much. We only have a few minutes left. I will once again, it would have to be maximum 60 seconds, but if any of our three civil society speakers would like to say anything additionally, please do speak up. One point I think is very important, and that is implicit, if not explicit, in what we've heard, is that these commitments to these values are not just Western values. There has been a struggle within Afghanistan for 100 years, for the rights of people, including women's rights. This is homegrown as well as internationally supported. But sometimes there has been criticism, including in this call, and the way the international community has gone about supporting Afghan civil society. Sometimes not going to the grassroots enough. I'm very struck by your point, Dr. Seb, that if you're going to do civil society to civil society support, you've got to be focused and organized about it. And one of the things I'm taking away from this conversation is that it's not just about focusing on the talks, it's about engaging with powerful actors and trying to hold them more to account. And that applies to everyone. The questions that we've had, I think we've kind of, in a way, covered them. I mean, some of them are quite brutal in a way. Is the EU going to abandon Afghanistan if the Taliban take over? And I think we've heard the answer is no. And the message is that it must not and should not. But clearly, it is going to be quite tough to figure out how that could be, how could that be done? And then there's an interesting question about what can be expected of the Taliban by the European Union if they do take control. I had the experience of working with the Taliban when they were not the recognized government in the late 90s. It's quite difficult, and I don't know whether they have become more sophisticated in terms of their understanding of how to run government and deliver services. One would hope so, because that would be useful in terms of reaching a political agreement. But I'm doing the talking because I can't see anybody else putting their hand up. But last chance for Ahmed, Fariha, and Huma, if you want to say anything, but you would have to be very, very brief. Would you like to just jump in, Ahmed?
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Excellency Dr. Abdullah, once again. I think the issue of support to civil society, in that context, I would like to also highlight the issue of regulatory framework that the government has introduced. I think it's perceived very restrictive for the NGOs and civil society organizations, making it very red tape and hard for them to operate. If we could look at that, because civil societies have expressed concerns a number of times that they are already facing multiple challenges. If the government could be more supportive towards them, that will really help. Thank you very much.
I'd like to recognize Stefan de Mistura if he's, I don't know how we get him on, but I gather there is a question from Stefan, and I have to acknowledge and give him the floor because he's my former boss and a close friend. Stefan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. But you hear me? Do you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. First of all, great that you have this meeting, well handled and very good messages. So I will focus only on two things. The Paris meeting has been taking place, as you know, about women issues, and they've been raising some very good points. Second, the Taliban are sending us a very clear two signals. Signal one, they are going to try to take over militarily as much as they can before the exit day. Second, the women don't need and should not have education. That's why there have been so many attacks. So that's the thermometer. Next point, EU is going to be engaged, and so will the US, particularly during the first 6 months after the exit. We know it by experience. So what can be done with that amount of money that will be or can come? First, unconditional principal support to NGOs. Second, conditionality and verified conditionality related to what? Well, in particular, one area. The Taliban are giving us that area. It is women's education. Here is where we would be able to test the issue, whether they are capable of understanding that there will be no money otherwise, and they need it if they are part of the future government. Now, is that going to be taking place? Well, that's the test, and it can be quickly verified. EU taxpayers are not going otherwise to feel comfortable about giving money to a country, a government, which is not going to at least apply this one. The Taliban's, last point, have apparently learned two lessons. One, if they link up to Al-Qaeda, they lose everything. The proof of history was there. And the second, they need money, even if they are in the government. Otherwise, there will be a revolution. It will be a constant separation inside the country. And to get that money, they need at least, to start with, to reply to the thermometer, which is women's education. That's why the campaign, which you Afghan women have been raising, and we believe in it, they raised the Kalashnikov, you and us raised the pen. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for these points. It leaves me in a terrible dilemma because we've reached the end of our session, but I do think those were very important. I have to say, you know, I wonder if the Taliban just realize how dangerous a military victory, in inverted commas, for them will be, both for them and for everyone. I do not think they will be able to meet the expectations of the population, and this is, goes back to the carrots and sticks thing, and the degree to which they are alert to these things. And I suspect, as ever, there are some who are, but the bulk simply are not. I'm going to end this meeting, unless anyone else would like to speak up, with Fariha, because you dropped out. If you could be extraordinarily brief, but I do think it's appropriate that you, as such a brave activist, lady activist in Kabul, do have the final word on this.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for giving me this time. Sorry for disconnectivity. I was dropped off the call. Half of what I wanted to share was left, but anyways, it was covered somehow by other panelists as well. But just wanted to comment on one thing, and that is, of course, we need to think ahead of the time and thinking strategically in order to safeguard the human rights and democratic values and institutions we have, the civil society organizations, in the future of any settlement. Yes, that's important, and we need to think ahead of the time. But what I want to say is, today, right now, we are losing our talented, young, and prominent, security forces, human rights defenders, government officials. This is a very difficult time, and that's why I think it's now we need to focus on to pressurize the government somehow, using the diplomatic pressure to bring Taliban at the table of negotiations. That's what we failed. I mean, the government of Afghanistan, including the involved parties who failed to bring the Taliban at the table of negotiations, while we could have, to restart an inclusive peace talks in Doha and then go back to Istanbul and come back to Doha and just ensure a ceasefire or at least reduction of violence. Because without security, none of the government, civil society organizations, NGOs will be able to run and provide services. So what we would like from EU, especially from our international allies, to commit once again, as we have hearing very strong commitments from the EU, which we appreciate that. A long-term financial security should be considered just as important as development, safeguarding our democratic values, and of course, women's rights and rule of law. And at the same time, keep the government of Afghanistan accountable in terms of fighting against widespread corruption, and before every penny you donate. So, and not only that, I just wanted to end with one more word, which is that any settlement that we are working to get into that should reflect the reality that Afghanistan is a pluralistic society and need for a decentralized government. And there's also ethno-cultural diversity. And of course, each province has its own aspiration and development priorities. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I am now going to give the floor to Petras, just to close the meeting. But may I end, I don't want to preempt what he says, but I just want to thank all the speakers, everybody, Marietta, Dr. Abdullah, thank you so much, and our three colleagues from civil society. This has been extraordinarily interesting. We will produce a little note, a non-paper from this, which will have no particular status other than attempting to capture some of the salient points just as an informal record of this conversation and share it with those who are interested. Petras, may I pass the floor back to you to close the meeting?
Thank you, Michael. And I do thank you in person and your institution for running this online debate. Very interesting, very substantial, not repeating, the principles which have been already well presented, but one message from my side. Although we are facing a new situation when it comes to Afghanistan future, but we are not, so to say, caught unprepared. We do have a good set of principles which are based on probably on our commitment to the future of Afghanistan, preserving achievements, Our commitment to support and continue our cooperation with the civil society as well as the government of Afghanistan, as long as those major conditionalities are preserved and respected. And finally, the European Parliament will remain very active in monitoring the situation. So we will raise issues as they come, and we understand, how important it is, first of all, for Afghan people. And I do like the call made by Stefan de Mistura: raise a pen and be indeed guaranteed that we will stay committed for future of Afghan people, by pen, not by Kalashnikov. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. Thank you, Fariha, Kuma, Petras, Ahmad Masood, and Marietta, and Stefan. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.